A war on cash is a war on the people. Welcome to the Interests of the People. It's Martin North and John Adams. John, hello, good to see you again.
Hello, sir. How are you going today?
I'm very good. Now, we've got a rather interesting story to tell today about what cash is doing and what it really may mean.
Yes. Our government has declared war on us, the Australian people. There is an international war on cash. There is a domestic war on cash. A lot of citizens are not actually aware of this, what this war actually entails, why it's being launched, and you know what are the consequences of this war on cash. So we're going to really unpack this, because for the last couple of years, this war on cash has been playing out around the world. It's been playing domestically, and we will see, I think, moving into 2019, 2020. An escalation of this war.
Right, so really what we're talking about is the migration of payment systems and money from physical stuff that people can handle and sort of throw at people through to electronic systems.
Yes. There is an attempt by the global financial elite to reduce the level of physical cash within an economy and to move citizens to a digital system of where transactions can be occurred. Now, in the Australian context, this has been called under the so-called war on the black economy. So there was a black economy task force announced by former Revenue Minister Dwyer in December of 2016. Saying that we have a issue with the black economy. A lot of people are using cash. A lot of people are getting out of certain obligations around tax. There's tax leakage. There was all these studies at the time that was pushed by Treasury, Reserve Bank and others around the tax leakage. So how can we get more transactions that are officially recorded so we can actually increase the government's tax take? Well, it's got to be the black economy. So this was the premise of what the government announced, and they launched the task force in 2016. And they called for public submissions. They went through a number of things, and then they announced they released the final report in October of 2017. Now, at the time of December of 2016, I wrote an article for the Daily Telegraph about this black economy task force, because the whole premise was a facade. Because I actually found several academic papers from European banking centres saying what the real agenda was. And the real agenda is all about negative interest rates, and it's nothing to do with the black economy, because the black economy in Australia has been spoken about for about 20 years. So when the GST was brought in, Costello was saying that this was going to assist in the elimination of the black economy. I mean, maybe there was some evidence that the black economy actually increased once the GST was actually increased. But the Commonwealth, the federal government, whether it's Labor or Liberal, has had decades to really tackle the black economy, if they so wish. And there's been a few attempts at the margin, but so happened, they say, in December 2016, we really want to give it a go and really attack the black economy. Well, why then? And the reality is there was no real reason for them to attack the black economy in that time, but there was a whole host of other things happening. They announced this at the same time where a whole host of countries around the world were attempting to eliminate cash in their economies, and they weren't saying black economy. They were saying for other reasons, but there was elitist BIS, but also other sort of European banking centre publications talking about the need to eliminate cash, because it's all about in terms of trying to drive, in terms of in terms of getting negative interest rates. Now, where has this war on cash happened? So there was a report, and there was a whole chapter dedicated on this black economy task force around moving to a near non-cash economy. So there's a whole host of recommendations that was put forward by this report. And viewers would remember that in last year's budget, there was an announcement by Morrison, when he was Treasurer, that the government would introduce a blanket cap on cash transactions above 10,000. Now that was introduced. There was some blowback by that by the Australian Chamber of Commerce Industry and a whole bunch of other business groups, because some of their members are cash-based businesses. Now that legally hasn't been brought in, and with MyEFO that was released late last year in December, it was said that the introduction of this ban was going to come in on the 1st of January 2020. Now, obviously the coalition, given where we think the election's going to go, they won't see the light of day and to implement this ban, because the legislation still has to come to Parliament, but we will see what happens in terms of Labor. But there was a whole host of other things that this task force said that the coalition has introduced in a whole range of settings, including establishing a standing permanent Black Economy Task Force in terms of removing removing tax deductions when certain transactions are made in cash. You won't get a tax deduction. So, for example, the payment of wages, if you pay your an employer pays the employee wages in cash, you can't claim that deduction in your tax because they wanted to go through the official digital system. They introduced some legislation last year around eliminating, any suppression tools that could be used to suppress electronic transaction payments, and so they started to do a few things on the margin. But the goal is to look at what proportion of cash is being used in the economy as a proportion of GDP and to drive that through the floor. And there's a whole host of political, civil rights and economic implications from that. But the reality is that while people overseas are very open and transparent about what this is all about, our government has hidden behind the shadows, just like on so many other issues like gold, and said it's complete what you would call a nasty misdirection. They've said it's about X, but it's really about Y.
And we're not alone here, right? There are similar developments in other countries. So, for example, I know in the UK, they're talking about removing the higher value notes out of circulation.
Yes.
And of course, in India, they actually did the same thing, didn't they? They took high value notes out as well.
Yes. So there's been, with this international war on cash, certain governments have implemented several techniques. So one is around eliminating the notes. So obviously India, now the Indian case was very interesting because they eliminated, they took the most popular notes in India, they eliminated those two notes, and that eliminated 86% of all physical cash in the Indian economy, and for 1 billion people plus, it was highly disruptive. It caused all sorts of political and economic issues in the transition. But the UK is looking at that. I mean, the European Central Bank announced that they were going to stop the print of the 500 euro note as of December of 2018. So eliminating notes, that is one thing. Another sort of technique that we have announced but had not introduced is introducing these, making it illegal to transact above a certain amount. So in Italy, it's illegal to do a transaction above 3,000 euros. In Spain, the cap's at 2,500 euros, and in France, it is about 1,000 euros. Now, that causes all sorts of what I would call issues around economic freedom in terms of civil rights. For example, if you and I were, if you were going to sell me your car, and you said the car's worth, $12,000, and I had $12,000 in cash, well, why should the government stop me, Martin, giving you $12,000 in cash if you were happy to accept that cash in terms of physical form? But yeah, no. So they're obviously trying to clamp it down. Now, on this issue of the cap, now the government said it's going to be 10,000, but when I've looked at some of the submissions that so the Black Economy Task Force last year called for submissions about this particular issue. Now, certain groups said this is a bad idea. Let's have no cap. We don't want to restrict trade or anything like that. But there were other groups, and this is a public submission, and this was reported by the Australian Financial Review last year. KPMG basically said, introduce the cap at 10, and then over time, take it from 10, take it to 5, take it to 2. And now, one thing is KPMG is an auditing firm. So why would KPMG be making such public comments about about the level of physical transactions. But no, there is certain establishment elite groups who want a initial cap, a high number to make it politically acceptable, and then over time just down, and force people out of physical cash, get people in the digital system and trap them.
And I think that trap is really interesting, right? Because what it basically says is that the digital platform, whatever it is, will be able to effectively control most of the flows of cash from A to B.
Yes.
Right? Fully auditable and traceable.
Yes.
Right? But also controllable in other ways, like turning it off or turning it on.
Yes.
So what it actually gives is huge amounts of control.
Yes. Yeah. Now we are seeing around the world a centralization of power, a loss of civil, political, and political and economic rights, and this is the new manifestation. So the question is, well, why are the elites doing this? And so several studies several years ago, but including the International Monetary Fund, the IMF have put out a substantial academic paper last year, and they've put out a highly publicized blog post that came out a few weeks ago, and I wrote an article about negative nominal interest rates, and we'll put a link to that in the show. But anytime you've had so what have we talked about all of this time? We've talked about a debt bubble, a domestic debt bubble, a global debt bubble, and if it blows up, we could have a recession/depression. Well, the IMF has said that historically, when you have debt deflation and you want to stabilize the economy using fiscal and monetary stimulus, you need to cut interest rates between 3 to 6%. Now. In the last few cycles, when you think about, say, the Asian financial crisis, 2001, the GFC, we've had the capacity to cut rates aggressively because they were still at reasonably high levels. Where we are today around the world is we have ultra low interest rates, and we don't have the capacity to cut interest rates 3 to 6% because at the current levels it is below 3%. So in the economic literature they talk about the zero bound problem. So now we have seen certain governments around the world introduce negative nominal interest rates to date. So the country that's taken negative interest rates to the lowest level is Switzerland at negative 0.75%. But no one has in human history ever gone to like -3%. -4%, and when this Armageddon comes, this global Armageddon that I've been talking about, which the IMF openly says it's a possibility, they say that they may have to require central banks to take negative interest rates or interest rate policy to -3, -4. Never been done before. But now, so when they have, even at these marginal rates, like Japan, in terms of Switzerland and the ECB and others, when they have gone negative, it's created an unanticipated problem, and that problem was the hoarding of cash. So, for example, when it was introduced in Japan, the number one consumer item was actually safes. Japanese citizens got safes, put them in the house, and said to themselves, because when you hold a physical $50 note, the question is, what's the nominal interest rate you pay on that physical note? The answer is 0. You don't get any interest for it, and you don't pay any interest. And so when they took interest rates negative, and what that actually means for the viewers is, if you have a deposit, well, you have to pay part of your principal to the bank for the privilege of having your money in the bank. Well, if you take it out and hold it as physical cash, well, you pay 0, which is above the official interest rate. And basically, so what's the purpose of negative interest rates? It's to force people to get their money out of the bank and either to spend or invest, and you get a short-term sugar hit in terms of an increase in GDP growth. So they want people to spend, they want people to consume. You've got this issue of the zero bound, so let's go negative, and then people said, well, I don't want to spend, I don't want to invest, and I'm not going to pay the bank to have my money in the bank, I'm going to take the physical notes. And that's the anticipated problem that they found, particularly in Japan. And they said, well, we can't have this, because it's it's undermining the whole central bank framework. So what do we need to do now? We need to eliminate cash. So that was the first idea. And so this is where the war on cash comes from. It's all about giving central banks, the IMF, BIS, the capacity to take interest rates to zero. Because the reality is, if they run out of space to continue to lower interest rates, what does that do? Global depression. Because at some point the global debt bubble will pop, and if you can't reinflate the debt because you've exhausted QE, you've exhausted taking interest rates down, you've got nowhere to go, and that is the end of the journey. And they know that, so this is why they say, no, we need to continue this on for another 10 years by going to -3 and -4, even though the IMF openly says they've never done it before, and a whole host of the implications of this, they don't know what it's actually going to do. There's a lot of guesses, even in their own paperwork, to say, we think it's going to do this, we think it's going to do that, but without any historical empirical evidence, we can't really be sure. So, but that's the reason why, because they are trying to keep this debt bubble going for as long as possible, and that's why we have the war on cash.
So what that basically says is, a decade ago we did QE, right, to try and basically pull ourselves out of the problem we were in.
Yeah, well, right? Yeah, QE, and we took interest rates to zero.
Exactly, and as part of that, interest rates came down.
Yeah,
hasn't solved anything. We've got precisely the same issues continuing, and in fact, debt continues to rise. So now they're looking for additional tools.
Yes,
and so effectively, negative interest rates is another tool that can be used. However, there are side effects of that, specifically cash hoarding. So they need a mechanism to be able to stop cash being hoarded.
Yes, precisely, yep. Precisely. So we are seeing this war on cash around. It is happening. It is happening literally as we speak. Most Australians don't actually know that their government is actually trying to eliminate cash in the economy. And there's another. So there's a few fronts. So the main front is around this elimination of cash, using some of these bans, using some of these list of techniques. But there's also the Reserve Bank and the commercial banks have introduced this platform called the New Payment Platform. And so you know about that. How about you speak about that?
Sure. Yeah. So essentially, if you go back a decade or two, there were lots of different payment platforms between individual banks, but they were all bilateral in nature, costly and complex, and not very well geared up to the new generation of payments. Instant payments. It took a long time to clear. So effectively, the bank led a program where all of the major banks in Australia and the Reserve Bank together concocted the next payment platform, the new payment platform. And that's been rolled out now. So effectively now it means that there is a centralised platform to make payments in Australia. And they basically have a base level of capability, which is putting payments through it, left, right and centre, in real time. But they also have the ability then to add other, quote, value-added services on top, and that's where some of the opportunities may be. However, the other way of thinking about it is you've now got centralised control of the payment system, and that's what NPP actually provides.
Yes. And so NPP was introduced in February last year, so the Reserve Bank has been a party to it. The big four banks, Macquarie, a whole bunch of other sort of smaller banks as well.
About 15 or 16 banks were involved. Yeah.
Yes, I think in the first 12 months, this new payment platform has. Had 400,000 transactions go across the platform, but the Reserve Bank has openly spoken about this at some of the payment system conferences in recent years, that this platform gives the industry the technological basis to further drive cash out of the economy. Now, that process won't necesserly have any political ramifications for it. And obviously, just for the viewer to understand what this new payment platform is, that when certain people are going to a restaurant and paying with their iPhone because they have an application for it, well, the ability to pay that in real time comes from this new payment platform. So that's the practical application that the citizen sees, and they think, isn't it great? I don't need a wallet, I don't need cash, I can just use my phone, I've got an app. But the consequence of that is they're trying to drive cash out. I think it's fair to say that you have said to me off camera is that the new payment platform wasn't designed about this broader war on cash and negative interest rates, but now this technology is here, it can be used for other purposes, and the Reserve Bank has said, well, no, we want a near cashless economy, and this is a new tool in the arsenal.
Yeah, and in fact, Scandinavia is a good place to look, right? Because over there they've been at this quite a lot longer, and there's been a big push in a number of Scandinavian countries to drive the use of cash down, and actually were quite proud about it for a period of time. And then some of the central banks and some of the other consumer bodies in those countries started to realise, hang on a moment, what have we given up? We've actually given up a lot of freedom, firstly, and secondly, we've made ourselves more and more dependent on that technology provider to effectively keep the system running.
Yes.
Right? And in fact, the central bank, for example, in Finland, said, actually, we need to be really careful here, because if we're not careful, we can end up effectively being held to ransom by the technology.
Yeah.
So
Indeed.
Suddenly now there's a realization that just this digitalization isn't all necessarily good, right? And then you've got this other point, which is you're now making, and it gives them massive control and the ability to be able to control the amount of cash in the economy. And also, frankly, they can turn the system on or off in a crisis if they wanted to.
Indeed. Now, the IMF. So we've got this. So we've got the direct war on cash. We've got this indirect war on cash in Australia using this new payment platform. Now, last year, but also earlier in terms of this year, the IMF have come up with a new technique to solve this issue around the issue of physical cash and negative interest rates. And what they've called for is a dual local currency system. So basically, you have effectively two currencies: a physical currency and a digital currency. The digital currency becomes the official unit of account, but the value, it is not the same. So the government, the central bank, can impose a exchange rate or a conversion rate between the digital currency and the physical currency. So an example could be, if they put a 5% conversion rate on there, is if you have $1 million in physical cash and you went to a bank to deposit that, well, you potentially could only see that you would only have 950,000, that being shown in the digital representation. So that is this. So basically saying, if policymakers put a actual economic cost on physical cash, people will use less of it, and that will drive people into the digital system. And obviously, the less physical cash, the greater the ability to drive interest rates further down to -3%, -4%. So now, so I think at this stage, this dual local currency system is more still in the academic stage. I haven't seen any evidence of any government around the world implementing this. But there was an interesting speech by our beloved Philip Lowe in the last couple of years, where he talked about, the title of the speech was E/AUD, an electronic form of an Australian dollar. And the governor went through sort of the pros and cons, said that this was a concept that the Reserve Bank was studying, but they had come to know sort of initial conclusions about the virtues of having a electronic version of the dollar versus the actual physical manifestation. So now. So all of these things are being considered in Australia. Some of these are being actually implemented as we speak. Most Australians don't know what's really going on, but hopefully through this conversation that they will be informed. But the question is, well, what are the implications? Well, we are seeing economies around the world slow. We are seeing, we're slowing. Italy's in recession. Germany is basically at zero. China is slowing dramatically. The US is having all sorts of issues. So this point of this Armageddon is fast approaching, and I think some of these policymakers need a lot of this framework in place, so that if they need to push negative interest rates to -3, -4, that they have the capacity. And to be honest, they're running out of time. Now, the question is, certain people have said to me, is negative interest rates possible in Australia? So because when this crisis happens, what's going to happen? Zero interest rates. So interest rates will go to zero. They will do QE, and obviously, Steve Keen said mid last year to you, they will do it. And then Guy Dobell, the Deputy Governor, said, yes, QE is on the table. Now, on negative interest rates, now, no journalist has asked officialdom, is this on the table? But they haven't asked publicly, but I can reveal tonight that last year, a mainstream journalist who works in the Canberra Press Gallery told me to my face that he, in one of the budget lockups, asked Treasury officials about negative interest rates, and the officials said to this journalist, "We have studied it, and we think we can take Australian official interest rates to -0.5 without any consequences." Now, why did they say -0.5? I don't know, but if anyone, no one has sought to get this clarified for the benefit of the Australian people, but the elites have know on the inside that Treasury and the Reserve Bank have looked at negative interest rates, and if they've looked at it, if they studied it, if they think they can take it to -0.25 or -0.5, if they need to, they will. So if I'm a gambling man, knowing how these people think, I think that the probability of negative interest rates in this country in the next 2-3 years is more than 50%.
Yeah, and so let's just sort of come to that then. So firstly, there's the economic lever question, right? So effectively, that will have profound consequences on ordinary people,
yes,
right? As we discussed, right? But then the broader question is, put that in the context of the central bank digital currency, which is what you also touched on, which is essentially, if Bitcoin is an example of a completely distributed digital currency, right?
Yes.
An electronic Aussie dollar is a centralized, controlled digital currency.
That's right.
Right? And frankly, we're going to see a fight between decentralized and centralized, and I suspect centralized will win.
Yes.
And the third point is civil liberties and personal control and personal liberties. Because actually, through those processes, we're going to lose more and more of our ability to do the things we want to do. We'll have to dance the tune that's being played by the piper.
Yes, because people like you and I who are dissidents to the establishment, if they say I don't like Martin, I don't like John, and we know Martin and John have their wealth or their cash in digital form, well we can sort of using what are the Chinese using? They're using this social credit score. If you do things we like, you can hop on a plane, you can hop on a train, you can fill up petrol. But if you say things that we don't like, we can limit your ability to transact in the digital world. And this is what's happening in China. But anyone who thinks now, no one has said that this is necessarily going to happen in Australia, but they have the technological capability to implement this for people that they don't like talking.
And I've said we are sleepwalking into a cashless society, and we don't understand the consequences.
Well, I think 1984, George Orwell, perhaps could be one of the most prophetic warnings that we should be looking at.
John, what a thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you next time. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll talk to you next time.